Good morning. Welcome to our regular Meet the Artist program that promotes our upcoming concert, Visions of America. The concert will happen on Friday in Oxnard Performing Arts Center at 8 o'clock, on Saturday in Thousand Oaks Civic Arts Plaza right here at 8 o'clock, and on Sunday in Barnum Hall in Santa Monica at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I am here with our music director, Marcelo Lehninger, and I'd like you guys to give him a round of applause for coming here, and this is the first time for him driving in Southern California. Marcelo, welcome. We're so happy to have you in our community.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
How is your first impression?
It's interesting driving here for the first time, but I'm glad that I finally had the courage to do. And I feel a little bit more part of the community now, just for driving here and learning the ways. So it's been great, yes. And for the first time, actually, I'm also with the whole family. So my wife, Laura, and baby Sophia, they are here with me. And so it's been great so far, especially given the weather in Boston.
Excellent. We're happy to have you here. Also joining us today is a producer and the creator of Visions of America project, Joseph Sohm. Joseph started as a history teacher who turned into a photo historian. So for 30 years, he photographed America, and he's been published more than 50,000 times in different publications. And I always like to turn on the view because Joe Sohm's image is right there on the background. Joseph, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like Joe to talk a little bit about Visions of America project and introduce one of the creators as well, who is going to join us here in a few seconds.
Before I do that, I would like to add one piece of advice and I'm sure all of you will agree in terms of this current rainstorm in Los Angeles, is when you're driving around in Southern California, rain is greeted differently here. So this is the equivalent of 10 degrees and a northeaster, and traffic will be brought down to a halt with about a ½ inch of rain. So,
and that's been explained why we're late today. Okay.
So Visions of America for me began on the Mississippi River, near where I grew up, right off of Route 66. And in many ways, the whole production is about becoming comfortable and remembering our home. And so my home was in St. Louis and now in Ventura County and Ojai, but the gentleman that I'm partnering with creatively is a man whose home was originally in the roots of America, which is New England, outside of Boston, close to where Marcelo lives, and that's Mr. Roger Kellaway, who I have the honor of introducing, my friend and my fellow collaborator, composer, pianist, and arranger, Mr. Roger Kellaway, and he's going to share a bit of his home and our home and hopefully your home.
Thank you, Joe. So with that, I also want to add that Roger Kellaway is the composer of the piece, Visions of America, and he is a Grammy Award-winning pianist. So with that, Roger Kellaway and The Place You Want to Call Home. Roger, this is beautiful. So
thank you.
Now that I have two creators in one place, I want to hear everything about Visions of America. How did you conceive the project and why we're performing it at this time?
Originally, Joe was talking about doing this project. And as we put the first demo that we did for this was actually in 2000. So we've been working on this for a while. For me, once the script was written and everything was divided up into different sections, and then he would send me contact sheets of different photographs that represented each of the sections. Then it was more like a film score for me, of which I've done 29 films, so that's the way I treated it. For instance, if we were talking about Native America, I would be thinking about, well, he used some eagle shots, so I was thinking about a bird song and writing a bird song and what would be my instrumentation for that in order to represent the Native Americans. That's the way I treated each section.
Yeah. I think we should talk a little bit more about the sections. The project is about 48 minutes. It's a photo symphony. The concept is very original. Could you talk a little bit more about what it consists of?
Visions of America for me is a 30-year project and passion. And if you were to get the big picture view, it's fundamentally of my experience flying over America at 30,000 feet. So it's very much a macro viewpoint, and it began really as a photographer, and frequently a term that's been used for me has also been, I think, sometimes used for you as a musical chameleon. I'm more of a photo chameleon. In respects that photographers, like most disciplines today, are very specialized. But when you're talking about a subject like America, it is way more than, quote, traditional journalism. So I kept asking the central question is, really what I was trying to capture was what defines us as a nation. You know, when I was studying American history, the question was, every country has its own unique point of view and expression, but what makes the American experience unique? So I went into that question, and ultimately I started to find it with one word, that basically democracy is the central organizing idea of American civilization. And if you take that word inside out and you find out how it is expressed itself, how we the people have built our small towns first, ultimately to our large cities, to the games we play. Arguably, baseball is the game of the common man, but everything is around the central theme is the rise of the common man. And as we watched the spectacle recently of our 57th presidential inaugural, it is very clear that America is about the rise of the common man. So what we wanted to do in capturing that piece of music and my images and the narration is to really look at a celebration of the subject I'm photographing. So it's not really about myself, Roger, or New West. So that's what we're really looking into, is how do you capture what we the people have built right here in America over 2 centuries and another 25 years.
Fantastic. Well, I know that Roger and Joe, we often talk about democracy and how it's an essential value of America. We also talk about what is the main, I would say, I grew up in Russia, what is the main expert, you know, American expert? It's jazz. So when I first heard Visions of America, although it's called Photo Symphony, there are jazz elements. I hear jazz elements in it. I hear blues. I hear a little bit of classical. Roger, can you talk a little bit more about the music itself?
Well, sure, I'd love to. But let's bring up the one point that I think is really important about Visions of America, and that is that Joe is an American history teacher. So for me to do the score and to make the music for Visions of America was to proudly learn how much of an American I am, and how much I felt so, and I still feel very proud of the music and much more connected to being an American because we went through this process. Again, each section.
How many sections are in the symphony?
What do we have now?
13.
Is it 13?
Yes. And
I know we always wanted to keep it to 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because of the original colonies, you know?
of which he was one of the founding 13.
Yes, I did that.
Nobody lives that.
Well, it was, yeah, it was beautiful to grow up in Massachusetts and have a very, very well-rounded high school. Just think of it, you know, we actually had music appreciation. So, you know, we spent an hour at least a week listening to classical music, you know, as well as having an orchestra and a big band and a jazz orchestra, and the last 2 years of theory, you had to write a piece and conduct the orchestra.
Wow.
So I wrote a piece, and the conductor didn't show up, so I had to play the piano and conduct it. Anyway, it was a beautiful high school.
Well, so 13 pieces, 13 chapters. You have a chapter on the presidents. You have a chapter on American native civilization. What else?
Well, the other ones are, and the most fun part was there is narration, and the narration you'll probably recognize. It's based upon my journey, but it is Clint Eastwood. And one of the pieces is that I began photographing, quote, democracy in America with the icons. So I'm also a bit of a punster, and I call them Amer icons. So in the narration, you will hear Clint Eastwood talking about Amer icons, and my wife Leslie, who is seated back there as well, she and I will both remember trying to explain to Clint Eastwood how to say Amer icons. So that's one of them. And then it goes into Native Americans, and it goes, you know, the small towns, which you just heard. Then there's another one about the rise of American cities, because, you know, it was America that invented the skyline. Chicago in 1885 was the first inventor of cities that way. We have, I photographed every presidential campaign going back from Jimmy Carter, which I barely was going then, to Ronald Reagan, all the way to Governor Romney and President Obama. So it's an equal opportunity concert. There's no political agenda, and we try to show both sides because that's what we are, you know, truly about, is integrating this into our American experience. But there are other songs, and we have not spoken about our other collaborators, Alan and Marilyn Bergman, who have, in essence, in their half a century, have helped to define the Great American Songbook. And the only reason Alan and Marilyn Bergman are participating in this project is because of the guy seated to the left of me, and he brought them in, and we started with one song that will close the concert, and not to give it away, but I will. It's based upon the 3 words that are the credo of America: we the people. And the first song that we wrote was by Roger Kellaway, with the melody first, and that's how the Bergmans seem to like it. And Marilyn did say, "Don't call us the Bergmans." I get lost in that, so it's always Alan and Marilyn. So anyway, the 13 pieces are clearly tipping our hats to the founders. The founders had no issues with the number 13. It was not only not a not lucky thing, it was actually seeped in Freemasonry, as I look at. There's 13 levels of the pyramid on our dollar bill. All of the words, e pluribus unum, etc., there are 13 letters. So I really felt, even Thomas Jefferson, when he was ambassador in Paris, he was so impressed with the domes that he saw in Paris that he actually imported possibly the first skylights in North America, put those in Monticello at great cost, and there were 13 skylights in Monticello. So this was an important number, so I figured if it's important to them, it's important to me. So we have 13 different pieces, and what we also wanted to do is, back to your original concept about jazz and symphony, is that both of those musical expressions, in my opinion, are great metaphors for democracy. Jazz, because it offers structure and it allows for the individual to take solos, but it brings it back to this ensemble. And the same with the symphony orchestra. When we were doing the rehearsals, as I looked at each single instrument, the violins, the violas, the cellos, each one has a completely unique sound, a color, texture. And if they were solos, as Roger was so ably doing right there, these solos have beauty to them. But when they play as one voice, there's power in that. And to me, that is a metaphor for democracy. It allows for our unique individuality and our collective expression.
Beautifully said.
And that is the symphony orchestra, and possibly that's where Marcelo comes in.
Well, this is a fabulous project. We call it the Concert Visions of America because we also have the first part of the program where we are playing Gershwin, and it's basically Made in America project. So Marcelo, could you talk a little bit more about the program itself, the structure of the program, and then we will introduce our other soloist.
Definitely, yes. It's great to have actually a program with all American music, and we decided to, in the first half, to start with the Gershwin concerto for piano in F.
Beautiful concerto.
And it's one of those pieces that, as Joe just said, kind of integrate various elements. As a symphonic music, actually was one of the only pieces that Gershwin composed and orchestrated, and it's beautifully done. It's a fantastic concerto, but you can hear elements of jazz and blues in the concerto as well. And so it's going to be a really beautiful opening for the second half, which is Visions of America. And I had a rehearsal yesterday with Norman Krieger, and I can't wait to perform for you the concerto.
Well, I can't wait to bring Norman on stage.
Yeah.
So I'd like to introduce our soloist who is performing with us on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this week in Oxnard Performing Arts Center, Thousand Oaks Civic Arts Plaza, and Barnum Hall. If you need more information, go on our website. We have a brand new website, www.newwestsymphony.org, for all information. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce a world-renowned pianist, traveling pianist who is a recording artist, Norman Krieger. Norman, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So happy to see you, and yesterday's rehearsal went really well, and I'd like Marcelo and you to talk a little bit about your experience yesterday, because this was the first time you played with New West Symphony and
Yes.
Marcelo Lehninger.
It was a great privilege and honor to play this concerto with Marcelo and the New West Symphony. It's one of my favorite pieces. I think, you know, as an American, this particular concerto, I think, celebrates the hope, you know, and the dreams that we all aspire to as people. And as a musician, I find it one of the happiest pieces and one of the most joyful scores, you know, not just for the piano, but the way he orchestrated the work. It celebrates every aspect of every part of the orchestra. And I think everyone gets a chance to sing and dance in the score, which is really so exciting, and just I'm amazed at, you know, having played the piece so many times, how fresh it seems every time I play it. You know, it has throughout the piece you get this Charleston dance, you know, which is very popular at one time, and yet it's kind of, I don't know, it's almost like a hunger, you know. Every time I play it, it just seems to feel like the first time. So.
It's 1925,
yeah,
right?
A year after the Rhapsody.
So a year after.
Yeah.
So all of the jazz influences that come from around that period, either from Europe or Stravinsky was influenced by it. It's all sort of coming together in that piece, and the colors and the way he uses the orchestra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is unique to Gershwin anyway.
It's I also, there is an element that I think is fascinating in the concerto, which is the second movement and the trumpet solo.
Oh yes.
And we try to understand where actually Gershwin got that idea. And I was told that actually he was in New York, and he was in a bar or a club in New York, and it was really late, and he was getting inspired or getting ideas to write the concerto, and he saw this trumpet player playing 3 in the morning, and he got inspired by that, and he put actually a trumpet solo in the concerto. And we're preparing a surprise for you, which I don't want to spoil, but I think it'll be really interesting. We'll try to recreate that element that Gershwin experienced. But it's really interesting because when you think about a piano concerto, and you have Brahms with the cello solo, and of course you have violin solo, and then Gershwin here, again, using another jazz element, and he puts a trumpet solo playing a blues line. So I think that adds a lot to the concerto as well, and with all the elements we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the second movement is sort of like in song form. I mean, it's this ABA form, and the piano part, it's very interesting because, you know, there's a long introduction with this trumpet, and so it gives me a chance to recover from the first movement, but it also, because the first movement is so technical, you know, and so full of, you know, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and, you know, all these choreographed pianistic patterns going on. So, but the second movement is very intimate, and at one point he even scores it for string quartet, you know, where I'm accompanying the principals of the string sections, you know. But, you know, the thing about Gershwin, which I always say that the two greatest songwriters of, you know, all time, you could say it was Franz Schubert and George Gershwin, you know, their gift for melody and rhythm. But Gershwin in particular has this knack of using so much charm and simplicity, really, I find is the word that I find, you know, in playing his music. It's not like he's using a lot of brain science, you know, or, you know, rocket science, you know, to create a melody. It just comes straight from the heart, and yet it's original, and it brings this wonderful classical music world and jazz into a unification, you know, which is really quite special, I find, and sort of set the stage for a lot of other composers, I think, to do the same.
What I'm especially proud of, and for this project in particular, that it is sort of made in Southern California, because we have Ojai-based composer and photo historian, and also we have a pianist who lives right here in LA, and it's probably one of the few times when we're using completely local talent to produce the concert. Norman, you are a full-time professor at University of Southern California. You have 3 kids. Can you tell us, how do you juggle your, basically you're traveling and you're teaching? How do you do that?
You know, I feel like the luckiest man in the world, because I do what I love. And, you know, first comes my family. I have a beautiful wife and 3 beautiful kids. And then I have a wonderful teaching position with, you know, the next generation of young pianists. That are just so brilliant, not only in music, but in other aspects, you know, so it's a great joy. I mean, I learn so much from them, and of course USC is a great team, I mean a great school, which I'm a big fan of, and, you know, playing the piano is just, it's fascinating, because it's taken me all over the world. And
what were your recent engagements?
Well, last one was at Disney Hall, actually, with the LA Philharmonic on their chamber series. I played the Ghost Trio of Beethoven.
I've heard it was a wild success.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I mean, the piece is wild, that's for sure. And then I'm doing Emperor Concerto next month, and Rock 3 the month after that. And, so, you know, it's a good life. I mean, I can't complain. I mean, I'm very, very fortunate. I think what's interesting, you know, going back to the Gershwin, is I lived in New York for 27 years. And that concerto, once you've lived in New York, you learn something about a unique rhythm that exists there, especially with traffic, and a lawlessness that if you don't abide by, you're going to get hurt. And meaning like crossing a street, or, you know, if you get in a cab.
It's true.
They don't, you know, there's a certain rhythm that exists in New York that I remember when I first moved there to go to Juilliard, and I was shocked, people walking through red lights, and, you know, the taxi drivers. But, you know, the last move of the concerto is like that. I mean, it's like, you know, and this is back in the 1920s that he wrote that. So it's still that hustle and bustle, that motor kind of rhythm, and exuberance was very much part of the internal fabric of New York. And it was originally called the New York Concerto. And, you know, but it's a universally loved piece, obviously. So.
How long have you lived in LA?
Well, I actually grew up in LA, and I left in 1972 to go to New York, Juilliard, and then I studied in London after that. But I stayed in New York for 27 years, and I moved back to teach at USC in 1997. And
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we're so happy that we can combine Gershwin, Concerto in F, and Visions of America. And I know you probably are dying to hear another piece by Roger Kellaway. So, Roger, can you introduce your next piece that you're going to play?
Oh, we're playing more. Okay. This is a piece called the 50 State Rambler. It has nothing to do with it's indirectly about the car. But what you see on the screen Joe has photographed every single license plate in every state. So you're going to see lots of personal license plates while the piece is going by. So rambling it is.
Roger, you're brilliant.
It's early in the morning for that.
I wanted to just to give a gist of why we're doing this project at this time of the year, and I would like Joe to talk a little bit more about the significance of this project at this time.
Well, I'm reminded of another inaugural 212 years ago, and that was when President Thomas Jefferson, we always think of that's the guy that wrote the Declaration, but he was a two-term president. And in the election of 1800, now if you thought you were going to get out of here without a history lesson, you are wrong, and here it is, but it's quite fascinating when you know about it. Basically, the election in 1800 pitted two guys that were formerly best friends turned political enemies. Well, we know how that can happen, and that was John Adams, the second president, versus Thomas Jefferson. So through a fluke through the Constitution, it became a three-way tie. There was Aaron Burr, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. And this went into the House of Representatives for the electoral vote. It went 3 times, 7 times, 12 times, still tied. 19 times, 26 times. If you thought this election was a mess, this was a train wreck. And so it went 35 times, still tied. Now, Thomas Jefferson had only one other person that disliked him more than John Adams, and that was our first Secretary of Treasury, the guy on our money, Alexander Hamilton. Well, Hamilton so was disgusted by Aaron Burr that he decided to throw his weight towards Jefferson. That became the 36th vote. Thomas Jefferson became the president. And the reason I tell you the story was, in just 3 weeks after that vote, Jefferson had to submit his inaugural address. It was then not a speech. He was not a great speaker. He wrote everything. He was a pretty good writer. And so when Jefferson wrote his inaugural, he said what is relevant to today. We are all Federalists. We are all Republicans. And if Mr. Jefferson was here today, I believe he would say, we are all Republicans, we are all Democrats, but more importantly, we are all Americans. And that every 4 years in these quadrennial presidential election that we invented, we come together and we renew the American spirit. And I cannot think of a better way to renew the American spirit, but leave the politics alone, to do it in images and ideas, in music and songs. So that's what Visions of America is about, is a reminder of who we are as a people and what we share in common.
Thank you. Well said. We also, we have a surprise for you. I mean, for those of you who are watching our promotions, you probably know, but one of our vocalists is Steve Tyrell, and another vocalist is Judith Hill. And Judith has performed on the last album of Michael Jackson's album, This Is It. And when I saw her in the rehearsal, I was completely floored. She has an incredible voice, incredible stage presence, so you will be delighted and inspired by her performance. Can you talk a little bit about Steve Tyrell? Roger, is he your friend or the Bergman's friend? How did he come into the project?
He came into the project through the Bergmans.
Through the Bergmans.
Yes. In fact, there wasn't any singer that we ever considered for the project at any time that doesn't go through the Bergman test.
I see, I see, I see.
Actually, we very fondly refer to them as mom and dad.
They did come to the rehearsal the other day, and I was sitting with them, and they said, okay, the piano should be a little bit to the side, and the drums should be doing this, and Roger should be doing that. They're really in tune with the entire project, and they told us a story that sometimes they spend days arguing over a comma or a word, you know, in the songs. But again, the words for this song, when Roger was playing, I could hear it in my head. The melody and the tune and the verses are all come together so well for this particular project. There are 5 songs, right?
Yes.
So.
And for those of us who are a little older and remember what real songs are, and I don't mean that purely from an arrogant standpoint, but a real song is where when you have a lyric and you have a melody and you can take both apart and they both live on their own, but when you put them together, this is a marriage. That's what a real song is. So to work with the Bergmans and to listen to the intelligence of what the stories are all about, plus the rhyming, it is, you know, it's a dream.
Well, and the other thing you need to remember about them is their license plates. When we went to their house for the first time, I mean, Leslie and I were together and we were kind of nervous and stuff. We knew all those Oscars and Grammys were all over the place and I didn't want to knock them over. But their license plates are what struck me first.
Yeah.
First of all, they have 2 hybrids. So it kind of said they're very environmentally conscious, but the license plates for me says it all. Words 1 and words 2. And so when I had to, since I wrote the narration, I had to incorporate the lyrics into the script, you know, so everything that Roger was dealing with musically, it was we, comma, the people, apostrophe. And if I had any apostrophe, comma, or whatever, believe me, I heard about it because every letter has to be in the right spot.
Fantastic. Well, we are so privileged to work with such a great, talented group of people. So just to summarize about the project, we have images that are projected on a big screen. We have the rhythm section, full orchestra. We have a 24-piece choir and 2 vocalists, and narration, pre-recorded narration by Clint Eastwood that tells a story about photographing democracy. It's Joe's story of his traveling across the United States and for 30 years and photographing America. So the project is phenomenal, and I hope you all come and join us and tell your friends about it, because you will be delighted. It's also a West Coast premiere. This particular photo symphony was performed in Philadelphia and Boston Pops, actually Boston Pops in summer of 2012, and we're premiering it in Southern California. It's very important for us to engage new audiences, and this particular concert is specifically designed for that. I wanted to talk a little bit about engaging audiences. Norman, you work with younger generation. How much outreach do you do in the community? And
well, as a performer, I think it's, in the last 25 years, one of the things I love to do is to go into elementary schools, into junior highs, high schools, and I was involved with a program called Affiliate Artists many, many years ago, and they sort of coined the word informants. Mm-hmm. And so I would go into a classroom of 5, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and I'd play for them, and I'd talk to them, and I'd take questions from them. And you know, it was so inspiring because in that kind of situation, you go into a community for 2 weeks, you go to all the schools, the Elks clubs, the Rotary clubs, and you build an audience for the symphony concert at the end. And that really is something that I enjoy doing even today when I travel. But I think all of us should do that. I mean, you know, because you know the schools don't do it enough.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking about growing up in Massachusetts,
not anymore.
And so if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
Well, and can I add, not only that, what else is absent in the schools is not only musical appreciation, which is where I too was brought into classical music, but American history and civics. So those elements are what we are really addressing here. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a former teacher turned photographer is to, you know, as you say, bring it to another audience in whatever way that you can. So I think that's part of the aspiration of this project. Yeah. And one other personal note, I believe Natalia, she may not be inclined to talk about it, but she's actually part of the story because she just, I believe, voted the very first time in her first election.
Thank you. When Joe and I talked about Visions of America, I said, you know, it's personal. It's a personal project for me. I am so excited. This is my first election, and I was very thrilled about it. But I wanted to turn back to developing new audiences because this is so important for us as a symphony. For example, in a week from now, Marcelo will be doing symphonic adventures concerts for about 7,000 kids, where we specifically created a program for them, and it's based on California education standards. So Marcelo will be talking about immigrants, introducing music of immigrants, and we're going to be introducing instruments. So we're very excited to do this in the community. We also just recently are engaged in a project called Harmony Project, where we not only have about 50 kids in the program where we gave them instruments, they're also at-risk youth, and we do after school lessons for them. So it's an exciting time, and I am so glad that the majority of them are coming to see the concert. So without further ado, I really would like Norman to play one more time for us in closing of our program. Thank you so much for joining us today. Norman, what are you playing?
Well, since we're on Celebrating America, why don't I play one of the preludes of George Gershwin?
Fantastic, thank you.